welcome to the DevOps for NetSuite Change Management webinar. I'm Sean Rill. I'm part of our sales team here at Salto from St. Louis, Missouri. I also have with me Scott Dixon. He's part of our customer engineering team based in New York, New York. So what is DevOps? So depending on the audience that you're talking to, DevOps can mean a lot of things. It's one of those buzzwords that we hear in the engineering or in the software management world that can mean a lot of different things. And so in context of today's presentation, DevOps is a modern framework for customizing and maintaining software. Now, the as code concept completely transformed IT. We're seeing trends in the DevOps world, but in the IT world, the modern IT world, where the title of business engineer is now being applied to teams that are responsible specifically for maintaining and managing core business applications. We're also seeing QA teams that are specifically designated to ensure the quality of code across dozens of applications. And what we're seeing now is that these operational tasks are being automated with code. And so these ad hoc processes are now being standardized. Organizational knowledge silos are being shared so that multiple teams can work on larger projects without any implication of knowledge not being shared. Long delivery cycles have now become continuous, so teams are delivering changes to applications dozens of times a week, and larger organizations dozens of times a day. And the increased frequency is also coming with higher quality code. So we're seeing a lot of efficiencies being delivered with DevOps. But what does this mean? What are the challenges that we can address with DevOps? Well, it can help us understand who's making changes across our environment? What's implemented? Like what sort of customizations do we have across a mature environment? Who's making the change? What changes were made and when were they made? What sort of dependencies do we have for just a single object? What if we make a change to that object? What are the implications across our entire application, or even in other systems, other applications that may be integrated with our application we're responsible for? Ultimately, what this allows us to do is create reliable deployments. So we don't have to worry anymore about if we make multiple changes or large changes, that it's going to have an impact on production. We can create a very reliable way of promoting changes across very mature environments. Not only that, how do we create versions so that if there is a change that we don't like or something bad happens in production, how do we quickly revert back to minimize damage? And how do we leave a digital trail for auditing and compliance? Not only this, but I know that today we're talking about DevOps for NetSuite. But what's interesting is DevOps, as everyone knows, can be applied across the entire stack. And so we should have a way to be able to standardize the practice of DevOps across many, many applications, because every single organization today with their core business applications, they're integrating things into, for example, NetSuite, like Salesforce or Zendesk or Jira. And they want to be able to understand that if we make a change in a core business application, what is the potential impact across other applications as well? So where do we start? It's actually a lot easier than you think to incorporate DevOps into NetSuite. So the foundation of where we start is going to be things like setting up a Git repo. You can use things like GitHub, Bitbucket, Azure DevOps, really whatever your organization prefers. And so once we have a way to document all of our changes and start to manage things like suite scripts, for example, in NetSuite, we can also start to familiarize ourselves with the different types of sandboxes that are available from NetSuite. So what this will allow us to do is create a foundation for promoting changes in a very organized and structured way. So having a couple of development environments, designated sandbox for UAT or staging that's maybe a mirror of production, and then obviously our production environment. What this allows us to do is really start to standardize and organize our team in a way that will minimize error-prone manual processes and allow us to start to leverage some of the tools that are out there available today. So I am going to start with kind of the basics of DevOps and some of the tools that we have available. So NetSuite native tools, you guys are probably familiar with them, and we're going to do a quick poll here in just a second. But there are three different options that we have that I think everybody's familiar with. The first is SDF. This is a solution, and I will provide a little bit of context here. Each one of these solutions has a right place and a right time. They also have their pros, they have their cons. One of the cons of SDF is it doesn't give us access to really all the metadata or all the configuration data in NetSuite. For example, you can't promote changes with SDF from things like the file cabinet. Copy to account is great for small changes that aren't too complex. When you're talking about doing big changes, copy to account can become less and less reliable with the more objects that we incorporate into a deployment. And then Suite Bundler is an amazing tool. It's very useful. It has a time and a place. The problem we see here is NetSuite just announced that they may be sunsetting the support of Suite Bundlers. We don't really know what the future holds for Suite Bundler, but these are available. If we wanted to start to implement DevOps, what would that look like? You know, in a structured way, DevOps is a broad term. It's very intimidating, but ultimately, there are some steps that we can take to put DevOps in place and really build a foundation and start small and then build up to scale. So where we would start is actually starting to pull in all of the data that we have in our configuration of NetSuite and have it in one place. So once we have the data and we have visibility into all the objects and all of their dependencies, then we can start to do some interesting things. So it allows us to clean up technical debt. It allows us to start to do version control. So once we have a source control in place, we can start to do versioning. And we can also start to standardize our process across one team, multiple teams, depending on how many folks are touching NetSuite. Another thing that we can do is we can start to incorporate dev changes. So manual promotion, automated promotion, depending on where you're at in your life cycle, we can start to incorporate not only our own development life cycles, but also external cycles like with third-party consultants. This allows us to also incorporate governance. So being able to enable teams to contribute to building deployments or contributing to building changes in dev, but not promoting things all the way up to production. So being able to sort of separate duties and also being able to refresh your sandbox. This is something that I think a lot of folks in the NetSuite world are a little uneasy about. When you hear sandbox refresh, you think, oh, my work's about to get wiped out. So DevOps actually allows us to incorporate this as sort of just an automatic motion as part of the development process so that our sandboxes are always pretty close to production. When you talk about like a UAT or a staging environment, we want to have that as close to production as possible. And then monitoring changes, being able to, on a weekly or monthly basis, being able to report it to leadership to say, hey, these are all the changes we made, and this is the impact that it's having on the business. And this leads us to really the aspirational goal, I think, for a lot of larger organizations or just organizations in general that are trying to implement efficiency, which is full automation. A unified CI/CD pipeline across multiple applications, or in this case, NetSuite, being able to do things like branching, integrated approvals, and automating your deployments as much as possible. So with that, I wanted to go into a hypothetical. So what if it was possible to promote changes between environments with just a few clicks? And what if it was possible, what if there was a solution that would enable you to replicate your sandboxes and do back promoting from production into, say, UAT or staging without impacting any of your in-flight projects? What if you could separate duties and give everyone visibility into what they need to work on without enabling them to do everything across your entire NetSuite instance? What if you could limit who could actually deploy into production? What if you could create a closed loop that enabled you to tie things to multiple areas of your team? So being able to tie commitments to production, to a Jira ticket or a Azure DevOps ticket or whatever ticketing system you're using? What if you could tie it to a source control like a Git repo, but also tie it to an application so you have multiple areas where you could go back and see the changes that were made so nothing is ever lost? And troubleshooting is super, super easy. And what if we could plan everything? What if before you ever even started to make a change, you could start to look at everything, the impact that that change is going to have so that your deployments are as reliable as possible? And so this what if is actually a reality. Salto is the first solution to be compatible with multiple applications for DevOps out of the box. It's a universal DevOps solution that allows you to manage the configuration of NetSuite, but also multiple applications. So if you have applications on the lower left-hand corner here that are incorporated into NetSuite, you can manage them with Salto too. Whether you're an admin, a developer, an architect, or even a third-party consultant that's working with a NetSuite team, you can use Salto and the team can work in one collaborative space on the application and have a standardized process to incorporate DevOps today. And with that, I am going to hand you off to my counterpart, Scott Dixon, and he is going to take you through where we're going to start is with the native tools and what you're used to with NetSuite. And then we're going to transition over into Salto's UI and show you how you can do it today if you're not leveraging DevOps.
Great, thanks, Sean. So today I want to walk you through how you can start to leverage some of NetSuite native tools like SDF or copy to account, and then showing some of the capabilities of a platform like Salto that can allow you to manage your whole change management process. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. And for the discussion of copy to account and SDF, just to to save some time, I took some screenshots of this process. So I'm going to be deploying the same workflow across all three platforms. So across copy to account, using SDF, and then finally using Salto, just so you can see a comparison of all three. So first up is copy to account. Copy to account, it gives NetSuite admins a UI to copy customizations from one to another. Keep in mind that not all customizations are going to be supported, and there's a list in NetSuite documentation that lists out all the customizations that are supported. But once you've enabled copy to account in your NetSuite environment, you'll see this copy to account button list that will pop up here on the top right. Clicking that kicks off that process. So the first thing is specifying the target account, in other words, where you want to copy that customization over to. And then just one little tip here, if you don't see your environment in the drop-down menu, just double check that target environment also has copy to account enabled, because you need to enable it on both the source and the target environment. And then you'll put in the name that you want to appear on the deployment audit trail. So keep it meaningful to you, something that can be helpful to identify, okay, this was the customization that I pulled over. So the next step is the copy to account is going to check for the dependencies here. So I've picked this workflow. It depends on the safe search, and that safe search also has a dependency on a transaction body field and so on. So copy to account should be able to detect all of these, and it should be also checking to make sure that it is or isn't in the target account. If it's not in the target account, it's going to automatically select those dependencies for deployment. And for more complicated deployments, if you have a really complicated object with a lot of different fields, keep a careful eye on this list just to make sure that nothing's being missed. The next step is going to be validating the deployment. So this is just going to do a check to make sure that all the dependencies that copy to account has added are needed, are required, and we've got everything. And then we're good to go to move to the deployment process. So here's what the successful deployment looks like. And then you'll be able to see that original name that you had specified in the original screen is going to pop up on your deployment audit trail. So you can always keep track of all the changes that you're making using the deployment audit trail. Now, again, not all types are supported. And then also with copy to account, you're going to be pulling over one customization at a time. So this can be a little time consuming if you're using multiple, if you're pulling over multiple customizations at a time. So you might need to leverage some other tools to do that. And so next up, I want to talk about SDF, or the Suite Cloud Development Framework. It's a framework from NetSuite that allows NetSuite developers a more streamlined development lifecycle. There's a number of different ways you can interact with SDF. There's a command line interface. There's also integrations with IDEs. And I've used the VS Code plugin for my demo today. So once you've created an SDF project in VS Code, then you would import all of your customizations. And it does support more customizations than copy to account. But again, it doesn't support all customizations. So there's an ongoing list in NetSuite documentation. So keep that in mind if you don't see all of your customizations pulled in. And then once I've specified the objects that I want to push over to my target account. So I've got that same custom workflow here. I can then add those dependencies to the deployment manifest. So there's a command in the VS Code plugin that just does this for you. And it's added a number of features in this case. So then I want to validate, make sure that I can actually deploy this to my target account. And there's a command, there's a validate project command to do that. And then in this case, it hit with an error saying that I have an additional dependency. So keep a careful eye on these dependencies that pop up when you're trying to validate your project. So in this case, it's that underlying safe search that this workflow depends on. I needed to manually add this to my deployments manifest. So I'm going to I did another validation. In this case, this validation was successful. And then I was able to run the deploy project and deploy this workflow into my target account. So SDF is definitely meant for the developers in the room here. It's meant for people that are comfortable using command line, comfortable working with like XML files. Next up, I'd like to show you how to use a tool like Salto to manage deploying this workflow. So Salto is a configuration management platform. It extracts metadata that makes up your network customization and allows you to see the dependencies and relationships between all of these customizations. You can also deploy changes between environments, not just promoting sandbox to prod, but as John had mentioned, you can also backport changes that are made in prod to sandbox to make sure that you keep those environments aligned. And here I've got my NetSuite, I've got my Salto account pulled up that's connected to two of my NetSuite environments, a production and a sandbox instance. And I've already ran the command to extract all the metadata that makes up my network or my NetSuite customizations. And Salto can pull down all of your customization that SDF supports, plus it pulls in some additional items, like, for example, all the objects in your file cabinet, data types like subsidiaries, currencies, as well as settings like company information or account preferences. All of that's going to be able to show up in this Explore tab. I'm going to be able to explore, search through, for example, if I wanted to quickly see a list of all of my saved searches, I can click through here, but I'm going to go ahead and search it directly for that workflow. So I'm going to search for that workflow using its script ID. And now I can see what this configuration is going to look like in Salto. I can scroll all the way down to see its relationships between other customizations in my environment. So like we'd shown in the copy to account, the SDF example, this workflow has this dependency on the safe search. And in Salto, you can click through to not only see the dependency, but click through to see that particular customization. So here's this safe search. Here's all the ways that it's been customized in my account. And if I scroll all the way down, I can then see its relationships to other customizations. I can see where it's being used by, what it depends on, and I can click through. So I can really start to understand all the makeup of my customizations, really helpful for any sort of impact or dependency analysis, understanding that if I'm going to be making a change to this safe search, what other customizations could I have an impact on? I also wanted to note here that this part of what I'm performing in terms of being able to extract the metadata that makes up your NetSuite customizations, being able to run a dependency analysis, this is all available on our free tier, which you could sign up for today. So let's go ahead and deploy this workflow from my sandbox to my production environment. So I'm going to do that by creating a new deployment over here. And I'm going to be going from my sandbox to my production environment. So choosing those two environments and then giving it a meaningful title. So I'm just going to call this new workflow. and then creating this deployment. As soon as I create this deployment, Salto is going to show me all the differences between those two environments. So especially if you're doing any sort of environment alignment, want to see what's the drift from my sandbox to my production environment, this can be a great step to do that. You're going to immediately see, for example, if I go back to the, using my saved search examples, I can see a list of all the saved searches that exist in both environments and what differs between them. But I want to go ahead and add my workflow to this deployment. So I'm going to search for that workflow again. And I'm going to click this box here to add this to my deployments. And as soon as I do this, you notice that the dependencies tab starts to populate. And this is because Salto is doing a check for any dependencies that workflow relies on. And it's picked up that the safe search is a required dependency. So I'm going to add this safe search. And as soon as I do that, I need to do another check, making sure that the safe search doesn't have any required dependencies. In this case, it does. So I want to add that to my list of customizations to pull over. Do another check just to make sure, and it looks like I've got all of my required dependencies. So let me review that over here, and now I can see that I've selected 3 customizations to pull over: the workflow, the safe search that the workflow depends on, as well as a custom field that safe search depends on. So from this step, I could either share this link out to others in my Salto account to say, hey, can you take a look at this deployment? Maybe they could go and review, make sure that there's no additional dependencies that need to be added. So this can be a real collaborative process. Or because I know that I want to go ahead and deploy this workflow, I can click on Preview Plan here. So what Preview Plan is going to do is it's going to create a deployment plan. Do some extra checks, making sure that there's no additional dependencies that we would need to add before deploying. Just making sure as much as possible that this deployment is going to be a success. If we were to have any potential issues, these customizations would show up under the skip column. So it would say that, hey, maybe I can't deploy this custom field because of problem XYZ, and it would pop up here. But in this case, I've got all 3 that I can go ahead and start to deploy. From this stage, I can click on the deploy button, and this is going to do that magic step of deploying from my production to my sandbox. So especially for I believe it was about 30% of the participants said that they perform changes manually from one account, from one environment to another. This would probably be a pretty helpful step just to with a click of a button, being able to deploy your customizations to your target environment. So while this is deploying, I want to mention that the next step here is a documentation process. So I'm going to be able to close the loop on making these changes by documenting the changes that just occurred. And I'm going to be doing this using a Git workflow. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Git, it's a version control system that's used by software developers to manage their code. It essentially creates a version of your software, so you can go back and see a history of all the changes that occur to your software, as well as potentially doing a rollback if there are any issues. Salto is able to take advantage of Git workflows and being able to document all the changes that are occurring to your NetSuite environments by committing these changes to Git. So now that the deploy has happened, everything ran as expected, didn't run into any errors, and now I'm able to push these changes to Git. So I'm going to click on the Push Changes to Git button, and this is going to kick off that documentation process. So it's going to automatically select all the files, and these files represent the NetSuite customizations that Salto has been pulling down. These are the files that were updated as part of deploying these changes to my production environment. And then I'm going to be able to create a commit message. So as I'm updating my NetSuite configurations, it's going to show not only the files that were changed, what were the changes that were made, and then I can make a little message that says, hey, this was related to maybe this piece of work. And speaking of it being related to maybe a piece of work or a project, you can tie this back to a ticket in your ticketing platform. So for example, if you use something like Jira, I can go back and grab this ticket ID, this BizApp 395, and I can reference this in the commit message. And you can use this with any ticketing platform that you use. I'm just using Jira here as an example. But I'm going to be able to tie that git commit back to that Jira ticket. So I'm going to go ahead and click push, and then it's going to push those changes up to my Git repository. In this case, I'm using GitHub as my Git hosting service, but if you use GitLab, Bitbucket, or any other Git repos, you'd be able to push those changes up there. And then from here, I can go to our audit tab, and now I can see that this was the latest change that was pushed to Git. I can view this commit on GitHub, and now I've got this message saying that this was the change that occurred from this environment to this environment. It's got a link back to my deployment. It's got a list of the exact files that were changed. So now I've got this Git repository that serves as a documentation for all of the changes that have occurred. If I ever need to go back and revert to a previous state, now I've got a sort of a backup for all of my NetSuite customizations. So going back to Salto here, I've in my audit tab, at the top here, now it says that I have 9 unpushed files. And what this means is that while I was pulling down the latest set of metadata that makes up my NetSuite customizations in my prod environment, Salto noticed that there were a number of files that have been updated, or number of customizations that have been updated, but have not been committed to Git. So this can be really helpful when you're trying to track out of band changes. Maybe you're working with a third party that's also making changes in your NetSuite environment. If you got a team that's pretty distributed, maybe not everyone's following that process. We're going to be able to keep track of all of your out of band changes here, and then you can also commit them to your Git workflow as well. So that way everything is documented in your Git repository. And then the last thing I wanted to show you with Salto is the ability to monitor the changes. So not only documenting, but let's say that you've got a number of saved searches that are really important, wanting to keep track of any new saved searches that are added, modifications to the saved searches, or if any saved searches are removed. You can do that with a monitor in Salto. So you can specify which of your NetSuite customizations you want to be alerted on, and then it will send you out the email. The email is going to show you, if I pop over to my email here, and it will show you any of the saved searches that were modified, as well as a detailed list of the exact changes that were made. So that was a quick tour through the various NetSuite tools, both using native tools in NetSuite and then using a platform like Salto to handle change management. So I wanted to open up to questions at this point.
We do have a few questions here, Scott. So
Great.
Where I wanted to start, let's go Carlos. I actually don't know the answer to this question. I'm hoping you do. It says, does it support config extraction for multiple countries localization? I believe the answer is no today, but do you know the answer to that question?
That's a great question. I have to check a little bit closer to. I think, Carlos, I think it depends on what we're referring to. Like, for example, if it's a localization in terms of like different translations, we'd be able to pull in some of those, but it really depends on the exact customization type. Also wanted to note that here on the left-hand side here, I've got my list of environments. If you did have multiple customers or multiple regions that you're supporting with different NetSuite instances, you could also pull them in as separate environments. And if that doesn't answer your question, please let us know and we can get you a little bit more details later as well.
Next one is from Shay Feldman. Looks like, does the dependency analysis check for dependencies with suite scripts? E.g. a record field. So I would love to jump into the Explore tab and just show that. The answer is absolutely yes. We pull in all the suite scripts, and so you can do analysis of all the dependencies attached to a suite script as well. So Scott's going to run through that real quick, and then we're going to jump to Poyen's question.
And actually, Sean, before we move on the suite scripts, just wanted to mention that earlier I had showed an example where I was searching for like a specific workflow using an element ID. So you can search for your particular customizations. You can also search through items. So for example, you mentioned check for dependencies within a suite script. You can also search within the suite script using the content tab. So if you wanted to search for like a record and see all the times that it's mentioned in a suite script, you could search through the content tab here, and that's going to search within those suite scripts.
Cool. Poyan mentioned how does it behave on deploying forms, field positioning on the form layouts, and field sourcing?
So for deploying forms, we should be able to keep the layout because that will be part of the customization that we're pulling in through extracting the metadata in NetSuite. So yeah, short answer is we should be able to keep the layout as is, as it's been configured in the original account.
Excellent. So Pim asks, can you also push to a certain fork, which alludes to our release that's coming down the pipe with CI/CD? But yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to give a little bit of color there, Scott.
Yeah, a couple different ways we can approach this. One is, like Sean mentioned, we have an upcoming CI/CD part of the platform that's going to be released that allows you to integrate Salto with your existing CI/CD tooling. But with the current functionality, you're able to connect one of these environments to a particular branch. So for example, actually right here, I've got my production and my sandbox instances that I've connected to. And I'm actually on the GitHub side, I'm connected to the same repo, but two different branches, one representing prod, one representing sandbox. So I can push to those into the prod branch or the sandbox branch.
We have a question here from Anonymous. Love that first name, pretty awesome. So can you roll back changes? There is a caveat. The answer is yes, but there is a caveat because of the limitations of SDF, and I'll let Scott fill in the color there.
Yeah, so we can roll back changes in terms of going back to a previous state, and that's what you would use that Git repo for. Some of the functionality that we haven't necessarily gone over today is in the workspaces tab here. You can actually revert to a particular GitHub commit or rather Git commit, to whatever platform that you use. But one thing to mention there is that SDF does not support deletion of customizations. So if it's a modification of a customization, like for example, you update something about a safe search, you update a title, that is something that we could support through SDF. But if you're wanting to just remove a safe search as part of the rollback, you might run into some SDF issues there because under the hood, using SDF for part of the process here.
Great. We have a question from Thomas Watts. One of the difficulties in SDF is that it's prone to errors during the validation/deploy. How do you handle this in Salto? Yeah, so one of the so earlier when I was doing the planning of the deployment, you notice that it's doing the dependency check for each of those items, and there's also splitting them out into required and to be reviewed. So already we're showing you the dependencies there, and then once you select all dependencies, it's doing more than just a validation, like with SDF. It's also creating the deployment plan. So saying that this customization needs to be created first, then we modify this customization, then we update this customization from here. So it's creating a really robust deployment plan where it's able to catch any additional errors along the way. So I guess it also depends on the exact customizations that we're talking to. But yeah, under the hood we are using SDF, but we are hopefully going to be showing these validation errors in a little bit more of a human readable format. Got a question from Gal here. How would you handle account-specific values like subsidiaries? Yeah, so for account-specific values, those are actually going to pop up as like a pre-deploy problem. When you try to deploy, it's going to say, hey, just FYI, this workflow, this safe search has an account-specific value. And then from there, you've got a couple different options. Either you can deploy without that account-specific value, and then you can update in the target environment that specific field that has that account specific value. The other thing that you can do is that as part of the deployment, you can actually edit the file that we're going to be using to push to NetSuite to include the account specific value in the target environment. And there's actually a little bit more in our documentation. If you look at our NetSuite documentation for Salto, in the FAQ sections, because this is a pretty common issue for users to come across. We've got
little bit more detail there.
And I actually posted the link to that documentation in the chat. So if anybody wants to click on that and check out the documentation, you can. Got a question here from Nicola. So say you remove a file from Sandbox from the file cabinet as part of the bigger change and push that change to production. Does the file get deleted in the target environment?
Oh, sorry, Sean. I was removing a file from Sandbox as part of a bigger change, push that change. Yeah, so from the file, so earlier we mentioned that how SDF doesn't support deletions, but however, because part of how we're integrating with NetSuite, we've got a custom Suite app. We are able to actually support file deletions through our Suite app. So if you were wanting to include a file deletion as part of the change that was making, as part of the file cabinet, it could be supported through our Suite app. And so it would, yes, it would get deleted in the target environment. But that's going to be evident through the deployment process. It'll show, hey, also this file, as part of this deployment, this file is going to get deleted.
Question from Thomas. You showed that there were 9 unpushed files for prod. Can you get an audit trail for all changes in prod? Do you handle any change requests / approvals?
Yeah, great question. So for those 9 unpushed files in prod, let me actually just show you what this is going to look like. So if I go to the audit tab, I go to our 9 unpushed files. This is going to show, again, like from the latest time that I pulled down that metadata to when the latest commits that were made. These are all of the things that are not tracked yet in my Git repo. So if I were to do preview push, it's going to show me all of these changes. And then from here, it's going to show me what those changes were made. And then from NetSuite, we'll be able to also pull down the user that made these changes. So in this case, this is because we've got a service account making some of these changes, but you'll be able to see that these were the changes that were being made. But we would recommend, keeping with that deployment process, then immediately documenting. That way you get a full track of all the changes that are occurring through a deployment process.
Cool. Got one from Thomas here. I don't know the answer to this one, but I'm hoping you do, Scott. How would this fit into a TypeScript development flow?
Assuming that you're speaking about, I guess I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this. I think if we're speaking about the scripts, they could be deployed alongside any other files that are being moved over through Salto. The other, just wanted to mention that we have an upcoming part of our platform that's going to be supporting like a full CI/CD pipeline that's going to include like a command line interface that you can use to manage your whole deployment process that way. And Thomas, if we didn't answer your question fully, we'll reach out and get you a little bit more details here so that we can answer that fully.
Absolutely. Can you create one from Shay Feldman here? Can you create the customization within Salto, or do you need to pull from an account?
Yeah, great example. So you actually can customize directly in Salto through a couple different ways. One is, remember how we were talking about account-specific values and how you can edit before you deploy? So that's one way you can do that. You can actually edit these files before deploying that, and then that's only going to affect the configuration in the target account. The other is through this section down here called Workspaces, which we haven't really dug into that much as part of this webinar, but it's where you can create essentially a local environment, a local working environment where you're pulling down local set of changes. You can make changes, only to your local environment and push them back up from here. This is usually for our more advanced users that are really comfortable working with files and code. We also have documentation on what the syntax for these underlying files look like as you're making these changes.
Got an interesting question from Clay here. Does the tool provide affordance? It's a new word for me, for committing via Git dev work files such as pre-build files, ts/webpack configs, etc., or is it only managing files and objects that appear in NetSuite?
Yeah, so it is really, so in terms of what we're managing through the Git workflow, it is only your customizations that are appearing in NetSuite itself. when you actually connect your Git repo to one of these environments, you'll be able to see it's just a series of files representing the configurations. But yeah, it's not going to be any of, for those that would live in probably another repo where you're managing your the rest of your deployment process.
Got one from Isidoro. Can this see dependencies from / into locked bundles like the ones maintained by someone else that I have installed into my account?
Yeah, so it in a way, so unfortunately we won't be able to see the locked bundles themselves, but this will be picked up during the deployment process as like an error. Hey, we've got a dependency on maybe a number of packages that are part of this install bundle. So usually best practices are when we start to implement a solution like Salto is taking a look at the two in the source and the target environment, making sure that they have the same list of especially managed bundles that making sure that those match up before we start deploying, just to make sure we don't run into those dependency issues. Because if they're locked, SDF actually doesn't allow you to look inside those bundles.
The next one, can we run from Clay? Can we run post-deploy scripts in the target environment to perform record updates, etc.?
That's a great question. I'm actually going to have to follow up with you on that one to get you a little bit more detailed information.
Excellent. From Zach Nelson, are there any alternatives to this web interface? Maybe an IDE plugin?
Yeah, so we do have an open source project just called Salto, and it allows you to work with Salto through like a command line interface. We also have a VS Code plugin.
Can the change monitoring feature show the actual detailed changes to a safe search? Question from Sean Talbert.
Yes. So Sean, what the monitoring feature is going to show is not only which of your safe searches were modified, but line by line, what were those modifications? Now, keep in mind, it's going to show you the modifications in this kind of file format. So that's what it's going to be showing you. If I go back to my notification here, this is kind of this line by line, and these were a lot of different changes, so the font is very small here, but you're able to set this up and line by line see all the changes that were made.
Excellent. Question from Tim Bousfield. Is there a pre-deployment approval workflow for code reviews and senior developer approval?
So part of this will be coming in our upcoming CI/CD release, where there'll be approvals and a little bit more of a process around being, approving a deployment before you push forward there. However, in the platform today, what we can do is set up your Salto account where essentially everyone would have read credentials to read all of the metadata from production, read all the metadata from Sandbox. But then when they go to deploy these changes, that's where they would use their own credentials, where maybe there could be some sort of restrictions. So for example, if Sean and I are on a team, Sean's got deployment privileges, I do not. We can collaborate on the deployment, and then maybe Sean's the one to go ahead and click on the deploy button. But earlier when I was showing that deploy plan screen where I was going through and clicking and adding all of the dependencies, that can be a collaborative process and rely on an individual then to use their credentials to go ahead and deploy.
Cool. Sean Talbert, can you track usages of particular fields across all suite scripts, i.e. able to answer what are all the scripts that are used in this field, or which are all the scripts that write to the specific field?
Yeah, so that's something that if I go back to the Explore tab here, this content search will be really useful for, because you can search for like the title of the suite script. You can also search for the title of a field and then see every instance where it's being used.
From Steve Boot, what happens if the two NetSuite accounts have different features enabled? Are these covered?
Yes, so we'd actually be able to pull in like which features are enabled as part of the Suite app that Salto's created. So it'd be able to pull in, you know, which features are enabled. So you'll be able to see, you know, hey, we've got this enabled in one account and not the other.
Excellent. Alexander asks, limited to GitHub or other platforms possible, like GitLab?
Oh yeah, sky's the limit. As long as it's a Git platform, we can connect with it. GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Azure DevOps, as well as if you have like an on-prem solution.
Cool. And then from Maxime, can you schedule a deployment? By example, push a deployment in production at a specific date or time?
So that is something that's coming up with our upcoming CI/CD release. In the meantime, when you do lock a deployment, in other words, you've created a deployment plan, that actually locks that deployment, and then you can press deploy. So it's a little bit manual. However, maybe your deployment window is on Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. You could plan for the deployment Friday afternoon, and then in the deploy tab, it would show a planned deployment, and then you can go back later and click deploy. So in the future, yes, that'll be possible. For right now, you can kind of manually, you know, create that deployment and then stage it, and then click that deploy button manually later.
Excellent. Couple more from Sean Talbert. Okay, sounds like across the board it's using SDF. So are you limited by SDF limitations? For example, you can't review the local or logical changes to a search, the search definition, because SDF obfuscates that.
Yes, that's correct. So there are going to be some, you know, we share some of the limitations because we are using SDF to pull extracting that metadata. So yeah, in the case of a safe search, yeah, the actual, like, you know, definition is going to be like a hash. Might be a little bit difficult to read, but some of the other configurations, however, will be a little bit more human readable.
And last one from Sean here, is the content search just a simple text search, i.e., it's not syntax aware?
Yeah, so it is doing basically a simple text search, but it will be showing you every instance where that pulls up. So you'll know the difference between it showing up in a field versus it showing up like in the body of a script.
And okay, so we have several questions that I missed in the chat. You guys sort of hit both sides. Sean, I love your comment about alternatives to StrongPoint. One thing to point out here, StrongPoint doesn't deploy, so Salto is really leveraging the deploy feature there. Just kind of scrolling through here. Want to make sure we answer everything. You push. Oh, here's one from Benjamin. Can you push settings into a different account?
Yeah, so as long as it's covered as one of the items that we pull in through the Suite app, and there's a list in the documentation that Sean had shared out of our supported types. For example, I believe user information, account preferences, things like that can be updated, and you can also compare between two different accounts.
And I think that's it. I think we hit them all. Feel free to throw any last questions in here. I am, Scott, if you don't mind, stop sharing your screen.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
going to reshare
I didn't
my
realize
screen.
I was.
No, it's okay. No worries at all. Okay, so let me share my screen here just so you guys get some final information. If you do want to check out Salto and start to, start your DevOps journey, you can check out our website. You can also check out our NetSuite specific video tutorials. There's a few videos in there. We also have a YouTube page, salto.io. If you just search that on YouTube, we've got lots of videos on not just NetSuite, but other applications as well. And if you want to shoot Scott or I an email directly with any follow-up questions, just let us know. Our email addresses are here. And just as a reminder, we're going to send out the recording of this to anybody. I saw Adam lost power, so we're going to send out a follow-up email to the entire audience. But let us know. Oh, we got a bunch more questions here. Okay. Carlos asks, What about user roles, custom permissions within custom records, et cetera? Is it supported?
Yeah, supported, and we'll pick up those dependencies.
Another one from Gal. In case a dependency exists in a target account, for example, a custom field used for save search, would it be duplicated in the target account?
Oh yeah, great question. So it would not be duplicated. In fact, it would pick up that it has this dependency, but it would also, Salto would pick up that the dependency exists in the target account. So it would say, even though it's got this dependency, no need to deploy it because it already exists in the target account.
Henrik asks, can you choose to lock objects on deployment?
Okay. I'm gonna have to double check with you, double check on that one. I believe the answer is no, but just I need to confirm. What we can do, although we can't, and if we can't, what I know that we can do is that through the configuration, we can actually choose which customizations that you want to pull in and which ones to avoid. And that can include entire metadata types. It can also include some very specific, like if you want, like, not to include the specific save search, you can configure your Salto configuration to do that.
Thomas asks, is there a setting for include instances for records?
Great question. It's coming very, very shortly. Not today. So if you connect up to Salto and don't see that today, that's expected, but that's something that our engineering team is actively working on adding.
Robert asked about the roadmap for upcoming changes. We don't have a roadmap live on the website or available to the public, but if you want to set up a call, we can kind of walk you through what's coming down the pipe in our next few major releases. The big one that I can mention is obviously the CI/CD pipeline that we've been talking about. We're also rolling out some adapters for additional applications like Okta is coming out, and we're also going to be releasing here something shortly where we support, we have support for Jira Cloud today. We're also going to support Jira on-prem for some of those larger Jira customers. And last one from Sean here, would be nice to see an example of comparisons across applications. For example, show dependencies between Salesforce and NetSuite. You can actually do that today, Sean. We are compatible with Workato, so you can actually see Workato recipes. You can hook up Salto to Workato. There will be more compatibility coming down the pipeline with additional adapters for like Celigo and Boomi. That's kind of further down on the roadmap, but we definitely are thinking the way that you're thinking as far as understanding how the space between applications works. And then Clay asked one here. I saw the UI demonstration was selecting a specific object and its dependencies, which you deployed to prod ad hoc. Does Salto also support collections of customizations via projects?
Not necessarily using projects, but admittedly, I did use an example today that one workflow with a number of dependencies, but most of our users are going to be, especially if they got a large project, you can deploy multiple customizations at once, so multiple save searches, a save search, and any number of things that you're working on. So it wouldn't be through a project. You could do it through a deployment in Salto.
Got one more question here from Robert Hollins. How do I restore sandbox after a production refresh? Disable scheduled scripts, redeploy work in progress?
Yeah, so a couple different ways to think about this. If you have an existing sandbox, or if you wanted to kind of refresh from production to sandbox, refresh all those customizations, you can use an existing Git repo that you have your saved metadata in, and you can use that to restore the sandbox to. You can also restore specific customizations, depending on. Sorry, the question just disappeared on me. I believe you asked specifically about disabling scheduled scripts. So that's something that if you've got that configured, it could you could push that into the new sandbox after the refresh.
Excellent. I think that is all the questions we had for today in Q&A. Thank you guys so much for your time. Hopefully we gave you a good foundation for thinking about DevOps, and we will be sending out the recording for this, so you feel free to share with with anyone you would like. But have a great day, and yeah, looking forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for the time.